All right, Dodger fans, we're out here at Dodger Stadium inside the pop-up museum that is going to be here at Dodger Stadium on the reserve level on the third base side of Dodger Stadium from now until the beginning of March. And you can get tickets at dodgers.com/museum. I'm here with Mark Langill. Did I give the wrong website?
No, you're fine.
You gave me like a weird look.
No.
Okay, that's the website, dodgers.com/museum.
Yeah, it looks
All
good,
right.
David.
All right. We're here with Dodger historian Mark Langill, who obviously knows more about the history of Dodger baseball than anybody else out there. Mark, great to see you, and thanks for giving us this tour of the pop-up museum.
David, it's a pleasure, and what a great excuse to come out to Dodger Stadium on a nice, sunny December afternoon.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, why don't you give us the tour, and let's start with some of the great things in Dodger history that we have, and even as recent as this past year, we have Cody Bellinger's game-used jersey from his Rookie of the Year campaign.
Well, just imagine that spring training last year, nobody's even heard of Bellinger. And if you had said X number of months later, he's going to be part of a museum display after 39 home runs, the National League record, and the Rookie of the Year, and now suddenly to go from an unknown, and now he can be connected with the fabric. So Bellinger, the latest Dodger Rookie of the Year, begins with Jackie Robinson in 1947, yeah. And you can see on this wall all the different Dodgers who have won Rookies of the Year. And Gary Cypress, who lent us all this great stuff, memorabilia, the great private collector that he is, who provided not only baseball but football items for the Reagan Library. Just imagine, most of this is from his collection. And so, oh ho hum, here's the Gilliam, here's Frank Howard. Here's all these different jerseys actually belonging to, he has every jersey belonging to a Dodger Rookie of the Year except for Joe Black, the winner from 1952, wow. And nobody knows if there's one in existence. There is no known Joe Black jersey, but other than that, Gary has everything. And so we're able to tell the story with whether it's Fernando Valenzuela and the 8 shutouts in 1981. You look at the different Seager, Hollingsworth, Nomo, the first Japanese player in 30 years to appear in the majors. And so right off the bat, Bellinger just sort of fits into this mold, and the theme of the museum is 60 years in Los Angeles. And so over here, you have a connection because the Brooklyn Dodgers being the famous National League franchise.
Well, before you go there, Mark,
okay.
I mean, can we take a look at my guy right here, Mike Piazza, one of the greatest hitting, if not the greatest hitting catcher of all time in the history of baseball. My dream one day is to go to Cooperstown and strike out that NY and put in an LA, but this is incredible that you have his jersey and his catcher's glove from when he played. Mike Piazza, Mark, has got to be one of those transcendent players that you've ever seen. I know in my baseball life, I've never seen a catcher do what he did.
I would compare Mike Piazza's baseball talents to the collection of Gary Cypress in terms of, if you go to Gary's museum, after 5 minutes, you just take it for granted. Oh, of course, you've got all this, and you've got a Heisman Trophy and all this crazy stuff. And it was the same with Piazza, because after a couple months, you just sort of took for granted that he's toe-to-toe with Tony Gwynn as far as being a batting leader. What catcher hits 362? What catcher comes up with 200 hits and hits with power to the opposite field and everything like that?
Yeah.
And so I think we all just took for granted. He's got the 35 homers his first year in 1993, and Karros was great in 92. This was just unheard of.
Right, and I think it's great that you have his catcher's mitt here because he wasn't known for his throwing prowess behind the plate, but what he was really known for and took a lot of pride in was being a great receiver and a great handler of a pitching staff. And if you look at the Dodger pitching staff's ERAs, when Piazza was the catcher, they led the National League as far as a staff ERA, and he took that to New York with him. So I think that's really symbolic of who he was as a catcher because he always gets knocked defensively, but that's how good he was.
And he had to learn, as you know, that new position because he's a first baseman and a DH at Miami-Dade Junior College, and when Tommy drafts him, as a favor in 1962, I mean the 62nd round,
yeah.
He's not a catcher, and Lasorda says he's a catcher because that's the way he's going to make it to the majors. And for him to go to the Dominican Academy and to learn a new position, it's one thing to hit, but in the National League, if you can't field your position, you're not going to be around for a while. And he had the courage to not only develop the hitting, which he had started as a kid with Ted Williams, but also become, as you say, a very solid Major League catcher.
I used to wear a Mike Piazza home jersey that he was exactly like this when he got called up in '93, and years later, he signed it for me, and it's one of my prized possessions that I have because he was one of my favorite Dodger players. Now, move over here, and we start with the inception of the Dodgers winning the World Series, which did not happen too many times, Mark, but it did for the first time in 1955.
Absolutely. Just imagine you're a Brooklyn Dodger fan, and I know this year Dodger fans are disappointed, the Game 7 loss, oh, the heartbreak. But just imagine you're a Brooklyn fan, 1916, 1920, 41, 47, 49, 52, 53. First 7 times they're in the World Series, they lose, and twice it had gone to Game 7. So they were used to this in Brooklyn, and the only time in the history of the Brooklyn franchise, from 1903 to 1957, when there was a World Series available possibly to win in Brooklyn, Game 7, 1955, Johnny Padres at Yankee Stadium beats the Yankees 2-0. They get back to the World Series in 56. They've got a home game in Game 7 at Ebbets Field, and they lose to the Yankees 9-0. And then a year later, they're gone. So this tells Dodger fans as far as how great it was in Brooklyn, but then all of a sudden, 3 years later, the famous Brooklyn Dodgers in 1955, nobody thought they'd be on the West Coast. And we were just the ultimate plan B, because for 10 years they wanted to build a new ballpark in New York, and they weren't able to do it. And finally, as you'll see later with letters from Roz Wyman and other politicians, LA had reached out in 1953, hey, how about coming here? And they never considered it until 1957 when they realized after 10 years they're not going to be able to get a new ballpark in New York.
Well, why don't you tie in Johnny Padres winning Brooklyn's first World Series for them and becoming somewhat of a legend in Los Angeles Dodgers history?
Well, he was a member of the 1959 World Series team, so he won that championship as well. And then when they built the ballpark, who are you going to have start the first game? And how about that length? The very first championship, 1955, Johnny Padres starts the first game. And we call it the grand opening because they actually lost 6-3 to Cincinnati. Wally Post hit a home run to beat him. But that was the great honor, to be able to start the new ballpark. And Johnny Padres will be a member of championship teams in 55, 59, 63, and 65. So this is the perfect length to go from Brooklyn, and we make our way here toward the first championship in Los Angeles. And all those years in Brooklyn that they're waiting for a championship, and how long did they have to wait for on the West Coast? 2 whole years. The first year in 1958, they finished in 7th place. The next year they finished tied with Milwaukee for the pennant, and so they have to play it off. And they win the playoff, and then they beat the Chicago White Sox in 6 games. And so Comiskey Park is when they won the championship in Game 6. Larry Sherry, and this is the uniform that Larry Sherry won.
Wow.
When he got
Sherry brothers.
Sherry, Norman Sherry from Fairfax High
That's
School.
right. What do we have over here, Mark? Is this signed by every member of the 59 the team? Every player from the 59 World Series?
Every player on the 59 team. Somebody just decided to get a cut signature of everybody associated with that team, including the Maury Wills canceled check from 1986. Yeah. Very creative.
Yes. Security Pacific. I remember that bank. That was the old school 80s bank and obviously 60s bank. And, you know, just to close the book on Johnny Padres, Mark, his career meant a lot more than just as a player. And obviously that's number one. But hearing stories from guys that were with him in Vero Beach, he was on the level of Sandy Koufax as far as a pitching teacher. He was a part of that pitching tree that so many great Dodger pitchers now, like Rick Honeycutt and Oral Hershiser, try to impart into these younger guys. Johnny Padres was a great pitching coach, and Jim Fregosi even took him to Philadelphia with him to be his pitching coach.
Absolutely. And he said on Philly road trips, and even when he was with the Twins later, he'd go by Yankee Stadium, and it was still the same ballpark from 1955, and you can't help but think. And we had our 50-year reunion in 2005, and I had to ask a fan question. I said, Johnny, if you had known 50 years later all the attention, everything that would have happened from that one ball game, do you think you would have felt added pressure? He said, nah, when you're that young and you had just turned 23, you think you can do anything. Yeah. And so in that mind, he had the knowledge as far as a young kid wanting to have confidence, but then as an adult, not everybody can pass along that knowledge and be a good teacher. I don't think he would have enjoyed being a manager because you got to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
But Johnny Padres enjoyed being a teacher.
Pitching coach has got to be the counselor.
You got to be the
manager.
friend. You
Yeah,
got to be
exactly
the friend.
Right. Hey, so we have over here some of the stuff of when the Dodgers first moved to Los Angeles and opened Dodger Stadium. Now these are the two things that I think is so special about this pop-up museum, Mark. They have a glove from the great Sandy Koufax and a glove that was worn by the great Don Drysdale. Were you surprised how big these gloves were for these two guys?
Actually, I have it easy because when you stink in Little League, I don't have to analyze as far as the equipment and everything like that. I've always enjoyed the history, the stories, and everything like that. But I've never had to analyze as far as the equipment and how they played and how they throw a curve or anything like that. And so a technical question like that, it doesn't really register with me because you just know that they were great players and some had different preferences. The thing that really registers with me is when you look above here, these are all game-used uniforms. And so Gary doesn't make a big deal about what they're worth. But Gary, when we were putting this together, let me take pictures of whatever I wanted. And I took that number 32 jersey and that number 53 jersey, laid it down with Don Drysdale's Cy Young Award, and took a picture that was worth $300,000 because on the retail market, $100,000 for all that. And so this is kind of like Monopoly money as far as what we're looking at, because Gary has this collection for over 25 years, and Dodger fans, it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to match, to be able to see the actual jerseys and artifacts belonging. But Gary also wants to tell the story. And so you see about the referendum in 1958 after the Dodgers had the contract. You see Roz Wyman and Kenny Hahn, two politicians that were kind of like cheerleaders wanting to bring a big league team come. You can see the first letter that Roz Wyman sent in 1955, and Walter writes back, "I'm too busy with the World Series. I don't have time to consider this." And so this is the fun part. And I think the other thing too, people of different ages are going to find different things that's going to catch their eye.
Right. It's their generation of what really hits home.
And their bias. Now you can see the Koufax jersey, you can see the Drysdale jersey, that's great, they're Hall of Famers. But then if you look here in the center, here's where my bias comes out, because my very first team that I followed was 1974, and my favorite player was Jimmy Wynn, the toy cannon. And I think it was very exciting this year, the World Series, but 1974, I think will always be my favorite team, because that's the first team you follow and the drama and everything like that. And so it's fun when you can help put together the museum and magically put your favorite player right in the middle, and you can feel like a kid again.
How about in the front row here? This is what everybody loves. These three guys with Steve Garvey, and this fourth one was a forgotten guy, Bill Buckner. But what year were these jerseys, especially this Ron Say Road one?
This is like 75, but the reason I did this, because if you have an eagle eye and you were around the team in 1973, this was supposed to be the original infield.
Yeah.
Buckner, Lopes, Russell, and Say, because Wes Parker had retired after the 72 season. So Buckner starts off at first base. Now Garvey was a failed third baseman because throwing was not his forte. And so he's stuck on the bench, and he's a good pinch hitter. We'd even tried to trade him to the Phillies, and Philadelphia said no. And so we've got this great pinch hitter on the bench, and somebody had the idea, well, let's add a bat to the lineup. When Von Joshua was hurt, they said to Buckner, maybe you could go to left field because you also played that in the minors. Why don't we try Garvey at first base? And so of all the infield, they spent 8.5 seasons together. Would you believe Say is the only one that played his original position? Because Davey Lopes and Russell, you know them as shortstop and second base, they were converted outfielders.
Right.
And Garvey, he was a converted third baseman.
Right.
So this great Mount Rushmore infield, it was a total accident that they came together, yet they spent 8.5 seasons together.
That's another great jersey. Bob Welch, great Dodger pitcher, rest in peace.
And a lot of people don't realize Tommy had the guts to pull Fernando in Game 5 of the League Championship Series at Montreal. The year of Fernando and everything like that, he took him out with 2 outs in the 9th and had Bobby Welch, just like the situation with Reggie Jackson earlier in the 78 series, to get the save. And Welch came in, and Tommy gave a motivational speech. It was real quick, and I can't repeat it for your audience.
Right.
Basically imploring him to get the guy out, and it worked out.
Now, this is Mickey Hatcher's 1980 jersey. He was with the Dodgers as a rookie and then got traded to the Twins and then came back as number 9, right?
Exactly, and he was in the Kenny Landreau deal. And so this is how Kenny Landreau got 44. And this was the final day of spring training in Vero Beach in 1981. And they had always wanted Landreau. And Landreau showed up in Vero in a limo, which sort of set the tone for Kenny Landreau in LA.
Now, I can tell you I have all these newspapers, Mark, still in my home somewhere. I have that Sports Illustrated. I have the Herald Examiner newspapers from 1988. and that's when they beat the Mets. Game 7 at Dodger Stadium, which was, to all of us, something that was impossible.
Absolutely. And it also, you know, Hershiser had such a great year in 1985, and nobody remembers because they lost the playoff, Jack Clark, in 6 games, and Hershiser went 19-3 with a 2.03 ERA. But unless you're in the playoffs and unless you get to the World Series, it doesn't necessarily stand the test of time. So Hershiser had almost as good a season in 1985, but because they didn't get to the playoffs, or they didn't get to the World Series, you don't have these lasting images. And Hershiser was just having a normal year at the end of August in '88, and suddenly he goes crazy. 59 scoreless innings, runs the table to close the season, and then is the hero in both the LCS and the World Series.
Now, check out this Herald Examiner. A lot of great writers came from the Herald Examiner. The great Ken Gurnick, who now writes for Dodgers.com, was the beat writer for the Dodgers and wrote for the Examiner back in the 80s. And you have the great columnist Doug Krikorian, who was for the Herald Examiner before he went to Long Beach Press-Telegram. Now, this is strange, Mark. I'm looking over here and I see an Oakland Athletics number 43 jersey. Why is this here?
This is actually on loan, and this is actually something to celebrate for 2 reasons. Because this belongs to Dennis Eckersley, and he was the one that gave up the home run to Kirk Gibson in the 1980 World Series. But I think the reason it's also a way to celebrate is because of how Dennis Eckersley accepted that moment in baseball history.
Right.
He always gave Kirk Gibson credit. He never let it affect him. He ended up being a world champion the following year, and he was in the Hall of Fame. And so Eckersley just chalked it up to he beat me in that moment, but he wasn't defined by it, and he didn't let it ruin his career.
Now, is this a collector's jersey,
This
or
came
is this
from a
actually
collect-
from
no, no.
Dennis?
This
Did
came-
Dennis donate this directly?
No, this came from a fan named Tony Drago, who acquired it.
Not related
in
to
an
Yvonne,
auction,
right?
Nor Dick Drago, who
Okay.
gave up Hank Aaron's last home run.
Okay, okay. Wow, interesting. Now look at this too. Hey, we got the last out from the 1988 World Series, the baseball the last out, which was a strikeout. Tony Phillips struck out. Rick Dempsey was catching that game, and we still don't know where the home run ball that Kirk Gibson hit is, but we have the last out of the 88 World Series.
We have the last out, and it's very special not only for Fred Clare, but also for Rick Dempsey, because in spring training, before spring training, Rick Dempsey wasn't sure if he'd be able to continue his career. He had played for the Cleveland Indians, and he got run over by Bo Jackson in a home plate collision, and just body parts flying everywhere. I mean, he didn't know if he'd recover because he had very serious injuries. So he comes to Dodger Stadium, he lives locally, and wanted to see Fred. And he sat in the lobby, and I was there that morning, and I remember people thinking, why is Rick Dempsey in the lobby? And he's just sitting there quietly. Fred knew he was in the lobby, and he would occasionally call the front and say, is he still there? Because Fred was testing him, how long do you want to wait? How important is this to you? And Rick would have pitched a 10 if he had to, because he wanted to keep the meter running. So he ended up getting a non-roster contract. He made the team in 1988, and how cool 6 months later that he's the one hoisting Hershiser at the end of the year. And so after the game, Oakland loses, Hershiser beats Oakland to win the championship. But in the locker room, Rick Dempsey goes to Fred and says, this is for you. And he gave him the ball, and for about 20 years, Fred held on to the ball. It wasn't signed or anything, but it was so important to Fred. And then Fred donated that to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So when we had this exhibit, the Hall of Fame let us use it.
Wow, that's great. Sounds like Fred Clare, something he would do. Now, there's a rope over here, Mark. Am I allowed to even put my foot, like, here, I'm teasing you.
Yes.
My foot's over.
Yes, we can do this, only because I love you so much.
Wow,
And
all right. What is so sacred that there is a blue rope?
the reason this is sacred is because the O'Malley family is lending us championship rings, and you can actually see Peter and Walter O'Malley's championship rings. And Mr. O'Malley not only lent the rings from the family, but there's also a Dodger Stadium model that was kind of like a desk that was on display in Walter O'Malley's office. And we also have from the Hall of Fame the shovel that was used for the groundbreaking in September of 1959. So Mr. O'Malley was gracious enough to share this. And it's really perfect because you've got this hardware, the old school as far as Los Angeles, and then the new school because Kike Hernandez, he had the 3 home runs, at Wrigley Field. What happens when you win the pennant? Well, you have something called the Fly the Pennant Trophy, and this is what they had at Wrigley Field. And so this is very popular because fans, we have it for special occasions, but this is actually the ticket. This is the thing that gets you in the World Series. And so after 29 years, and I remember getting congratulatory phone calls in the third inning, and I'm like, I don't want to hear it. The game's not over yet.
Yeah.
I'm just, not yet. And so finally, at the ninth inning, then you could finally let your phone ring because you knew that they had a chance, with the lopsided, but this is it. This got them in the championship. And so this brings us now, if you,
I'm staying.
We'll get past
I'm not moving.
We'll see, then we'll put you on exhibit. We have to have a sign. Greatest Dodger correspondent, having to put up with all the post-game and pre-game stuff for 6 months. He should actually have a medal.
Man.
Have a medal. Oh my God.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
All right.
So now we got the old history, but now we bring it to the front. And so now all the 2017 memories come. You remember the Arizona Diamondbacks? You remember the Chicago Cubs? You thought maybe even the Nationals would come here and it'd be dusty. Well, now you can relive the playoffs because you've got the jerseys, you've got the bases, you've got all these great players, and now suddenly it comes back. And so yes, there's the disappointment of Game 7, but if you look at the Dodger history, there's certain magical years. And you can throw out a year, and is that a pennant-winning year? So 1916, 1920, and you can just go through the list, 41, 47, and in LA. And so now with LA, with 59 and 63, 65, 66, 74, 77, 78, 81, and 88, it doesn't end with 88. Now you can say 2017. So now you can relive all the great moments of 2017, the Gatorade baths, all the excitement, because nobody knew at that point if they could end the 29-year drought of being in the World Series. And there it is. Now we can all look back and go, wow, did that really happen?
Oh, Mark, thanks a lot for the tour.
My pleasure.
Will you be here while the museum is open and fans can stumble upon your knowledge and you might be able to give the tour that you just gave us?
I will be happy to give any knowledge to any fan in the museum because it's very important I try it now and do it now, because if I try this at home, I hear two magic words: who and cares, followed by what's for dinner. So please, if you see me at the ballpark, ask me a question. It's so fun to show off. I went to my first game when I was 7, and I've never had a day where I didn't enjoy coming to the ballpark. So come out and visit the stadium, and make sure to listen to this guy on TV and radio, because he's the best.
All right, Mark Langill, Dodger team historian, thanks a lot. And if you want to come visit the pop-up museum, it's open between now and March 4th at Dodger Stadium. Dodgers.com/museum.